In this video, I will show you how and where to oil and grease your Singer Featherweight. So before we want to start sewing with this machine, we want to make sure that we have oiled and greased it up. So what do you want? You need sewing machine oil. Singer brand oil is fine. So Retro brand from the Featherweight Shop is fine, as long as it's a sewing machine oil. You also need grease. The grease is going to go on all of your gears, and it's important to use a grease that is designed for sewing machines. So, for instance, this So Retro grease from the Featherweight Shop is perfect. It's made for sewing machines, and it has a wonderful little applicator tip that helps you kind of get down into the gears if that's how you want to put it on. I'm going to show you how I put it on. So we will start and we'll work from the top down. So what you're going to want to do is to loosen the top cover here. We had it on to zero out our tension, but now we need to remove it. So just with a screwdriver, you can either take it all the way off, or you can just loosen the screw enough to swing the top open so you can get to the gears. I'm going to take mine all the way off because if I need to tilt the machine so you can see it, I just don't want it to flop around. So where are we going to put the grease? We're putting the grease on the gear here, and then another gear that's just down under that gear. It's what meshes with this top gear. So I find there are two ways to do this. You can either take your grease with this little applicator and just lightly squirt some on, rotate it, add some more, and as that gear meshes with the gear down here, it will coat both gears. For a restoration, I like to go ahead and put it on with a paintbrush. So let me show you what that looks like. So I have a paintbrush, it's a flat, skinny one, and it's my favorite for putting grease onto gears. And I just put some grease onto the paintbrush and then start applying it to the gear, just like that. And then I rotate the hand wheel always towards you, and I just keep painting it onto the gears. This keeps me from getting too much grease, which is just going to fling around all over the inside of the machine as soon as you start sewing. So I'm not being wasteful, and I'm not making a mess inside the machine. And I'm just going to keep painting that on until I get it all around the entire gear. And you'll see where you started. Once you come back around, you'll see there's already grease there, which is right here for me. So I'm also going to go ahead, since I just did a restoration of this machine, I'm going to go ahead and with my paintbrush reach down inside here and get this other gear just to get a little bit of grease on it. So I have my grease on my brush, then I turn my hand wheel a little bit so I can see a new spot. More grease, and I just keep doing that until I went all the way around, and adding more grease to my brush if I need to. Okay, so we've greased up the gears. Now let's look at the places we need to oil in the top of the machine. First place we'll start is right here. There's a little hole kind of right there at the end of the hand wheel. Go ahead and put a drop of oil down there, and as you add those drops of oil, give the machine a spin. Let it work its way onto the shaft. Also right here, I like to put just a drop or two. This is where the fork feed system runs over this little part here on the shaft. And those are metal parts rubbing together, so it's good for them to have a little bit of oil. There's a hole right here. Give it a drop of oil. And then we're going to move farther down the machine right here. This hole here is another place that we want to put a drop or two of oil. So give it a spin. And then right here is a hole. When you drop oil down there, it's actually oiling the back part of your thread take up, and you want that. Now, a spot that we might not think of so much is the bobbin winder. But there's a little tiny hole right here, and that's telling you, oil me please. Now this isn't something that I would do as often as the rest of the machine, but every once in a while you do want to add oil right there to your bobbin winder. This is also a place where you can put a drop of oil. I don't know if it says it in the manual, honestly, but I have found that if I want this to be easy to lift up and down, to just oil it every once in a while. It helps because there is a little friction washer in there that is definitely getting friction every time you raise and lower this. So having a little bit of oil on here every once in a while isn't going to hurt anything. All right, now let's move to the nose. So if you were doing a restoration, you probably oiled some of these parts before you put them back on the machine. We're going to oil them again anyway. If you turn your thread take-up system, you will see the little holes. So right in here, there's one little hole. There's also one back in here, which I don't know if you can see, but I think it will show up on the camera. Right there's a tiny little hole. And then when we put this drop of oil in the top, we addressed up here where there's another place to oil. On this linkage here for the take-up system that connects to the needle bar is also a hole. And I'm not going to be able to show it to you, but I'll show you where to direct your oil. So I'm going to put a drop here. Then I'm going to put a drop here. This one back here is already taken care of. But on this linkage here, there's a hole, and I'm going to put a drop there. Now I'm also going to put a drop right here and down here, because think about this needle bar is moving through the body of the machine here. Having that lubricated is a good thing. You can put a drop right here where the presser bar spring goes down into the presser bar. And then we'll raise our foot. You can also put a drop right there. Now, I like to make sure that every once in a while I put a little drop where the tension pin releasing lever is, because that's rocking back and forth as we raise and lower our presser bar. And I just want to make sure that it works nice and smooth. You also don't want to forget to oil this bushing here that the needle bar is riding up and down inside. And there are a couple ways. If you just put a paintbrush with oil on it down inside the bushing, that will work. And then you can turn the hand wheel and let the needle bar go up and down. Another way you can do it is to drop oil down inside. Just remember, some of this is going to go down and collect inside the needle bar. So you don't want to put too much, but you definitely want oil on the needle bar and inside the bushing. You also don't want to forget a couple of drops of oil, really just like one or so, to lubricate this race. Every time you sew, your hook is spinning around this bobbin case base, and that oil is going to help with all the friction, and it's definitely a point that you don't want to miss. So that's the places that you would want to oil in the nose. Now, before we get to the underside of the machine, there's a place on the needle plate where we can add oil. And this is going to drop down around the hook shaft. And you just want to, if you have a pointer on the end of your oil bottle, it's really great to kind of poke it down in there and get a drop or two of oil down in there. And then you'll just want to use something to wipe off any extra oil that might get on the needle plate. You don't want that on your sewing projects. Now, there's another place to oil. This is on the back of the machine. Do you see these two here? I'm going to show you what I think is the most effective way to add oil to your machine right here. So I like to lay the machine down, and then I put my oil in both of those holes. And then once I get the oil in the holes, flip it back up and spin my hand wheel. Now we can look at the bottom. So these gears here on the bottom, we're going to treat the same way as we treated the gears up in the top of the machine. Taking my little brush, getting some grease on it, and just painting it onto the gears. And if you get it everywhere, you can always clean up the extra that you don't need with a towel. So I'm going to spin my hand wheel now and expose some more of the gear and paint on the grease. And the only thing you want to be careful of if you're using a paintbrush is just if the paintbrush itself starts to like shed and you see little hairs coming off, pick them out. You don't want to leave them on the gear. So I did this one first. Now I'll go back around and again, spinning the hand wheel as I go, do the other gear. And already I can see some grease from the first gear on this gear, but since I totally cleaned this and there's no grease, I'm not going to take any chances. I want to make sure that there's enough grease there. Not too much, but enough. Then if you get it places you don't want it, go in with a Q-tip. You can just clean it off. Just like that. Now, where do you oil? There looks like there could be a lot of places to oil. When we look at our machines, we see a lot of metal moving with other metal parts. Well, that is where you want to oil. So we'll start at the top, and I always like to put a drop of oil right here on the rock shafts because that is a moving part. And we're just gonna give it a spin. Now, you will look and you will see right here, there's a tiny little hole here up top. Now, there are two bushings that you do not want to forget. One point here and the other point here. And if you have this little dropper, it's just so easy to get back in. This one's behind that lead sheath and add your oil. And these you want to do more often than some of the other parts you might oil because they get so much more movement. And if we move down, we can also see one here, and we'll go ahead and add a drop of oil there. And then also here, this connects, and you want to make sure that it has plenty of lubrication so everything moves smoothly. Now, working in this area is a little bit more difficult. Not so much here, but here is a moving part. And actually up in your feed dogs, you have a moving part way back there in the back. That's why an applicator like this is going to help you. If you don't have one of these, put some oil in a little dish, dip your paintbrush in it so it's saturated, and then you should be able to get your paintbrush up in there to get the oil where you want it to go. That'll work too. If you tilt your machine back, you can see you have a couple points here that get a little bit of movement, and you just drop a little bit of oil on them from time to time to keep them lubricated as well. When I'm all done, I just like to flip her back up and look at that. Look at how freely it spins, and all that grease and oil is going to help it work even better. It's also going to cut down on any weird noises. When you're sewing with your machine and you start to hear a weird noise, sometimes it's just because you need to add oil to those moving parts. In fact, I would say if you're spending the day sewing, before you shut down that night, you want to go ahead and at least oil up your machine. Greasing your gears, that's not something you have to do as often. But if you're somebody who sews almost every day, I would take a look at these once a week or so. It just takes a few minutes and see how are they looking. Does it look dry? Does it look like it could use a little fresh coat of grease? And just do it really quick. Your machine will love you and thank you for years to come. Now, as far as the motor, it also takes grease. And your first port is up here, real close to the pulley. And I like to just kind of stick my little syringe down in there and kind of pump that grease in. If I get too much out, coming out the top, I can just clean it off. I don't want that grease ever getting on my belt. The other port is super easy to access. It's right here on the back. I like to just stick this in here and kind of just like pipe it full of grease, just like that. Wipe off any sticking out the back, and that part's done. So pretty simple how to oil and grease your Singer Featherweight. Now, the only part that we didn't really look at was the bed extension, and sometimes those screws can use oil on them as well because we're raising and lowering our bed all the time, but we'll talk about that when we put the bed extension back on the machine. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was a quick video. I had to put this one in here before we put the belt and the nose plate back on and start actually sewing with our machine, because we would never want to sew without getting that grease and oil and all the parts that it needs to go. I thank you so much for watching. I cannot wait to see you again soon. Bye.